Welcome to Story and More podcast. This is your host Indu. Today I have the third and the final part of A Little Girl Called Jane for you. This is a true crime story. Listener discretion is advised. The names of the victim and relatives are changed for privacy and identity protection. You've heard how Jane went missing and was later found dead. Today, you will hear if the police had gathered sufficient evidence against the accused to get a conviction. Will the prosecution be able to prove that the accused were guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? And how the case played out in the court of law. This would be a case under POCSO Act, that is Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, if this incident had occurred after 2012. But in 2002, the Indian Penal Code sections applied. The accused handyman and the watchman were both charged with offences under Section 376, subsection 2, subsection G, 302, 201, read with Section 34 of IPC. For the listener's understanding, these sections relate to rape of a woman by one or more men in a group in furtherance of their common intention, something like gang rape, murder, causing disappearance of evidence or giving false information to shield the offender, and Section 34 would be common intention under the Indian Penal Code. There were no eyewitnesses to Jane being raped, murdered, or being concealed in the septic tank. The prosecution's case was based solely on circumstantial evidence and, of course, the confession of the watchman, which he could retract during the trial. But will he? In many cases, the accused would end up retracting his or her confessional statement during the trial. It was not new. A procedure under the statute provides the accused a chance to explain his stand before the judge during his trial. It is dealt under Section 313 of the Criminal Procedure Code. Surprisingly, even during his statement under Section 313 before the sessions judge, the watchman did not retract his confession. And this one act of his will prove helpful for him in the long run. It is established in law that conviction can be based on confessional statement. In most cases, where the confession made is voluntary and truthful and not retracted by the accused. Now, you might be wondering, why on earth would the court need more evidence than the watchman's confession? Mind you, the confessional statement was made only by one accused. The handyman had stuck to his plea of innocence. In this case, the person who confessed was not acting alone. He had an accomplice, and therefore, to make the case stronger against both the accused, the prosecution had to put forth corroborative evidence in support of the confession. What corroborative evidence did the prosecution have? Well, to begin with, the police had recovered a black-colored half pant that belonged to the watchman from the bathroom inside the waiting room. He admitted that the half pant belonged to him, but could not give any reason why his half pant was lying there. Then, most importantly, the watchman was the only person with the keys to the said room, and no one else could have accessed the room without his help. It was not his case that the keys were stolen. In fact, he reiterated all through the investigation and even during confession that the keys were in his possession the whole time. This corroborative evidence, along with his non-retracted confession, which was voluntary and truthfully made by him, made the case really strong against the watchman. On the other hand, the handyman's case needed more evidence tying him to the crime. When asked in the court, he pleaded not guilty. As mentioned earlier, there is no confession on his part. The prosecution needed strong circumstantial evidence to tie him to the act. The prosecution relied on the recovery of the handyman's shorts with white stains from the premise, the same shorts he had worn before changing into the long pants that the driver had noticed. The prosecution also had statements made by people in evidence. One, by the driver of the bus that the handyman traveled in. Two, the conductor. Three, the driver of the bus the handyman had slept in the day Jane went missing. And four, that of the manager of the terminal. The prosecution pointed out that the handyman had bruises on his face and could not give any explanation on how he was bruised. In evidence during the trial, the driver and the conductor of the bus in which the handyman traveled both confirmed that the handyman hadn't slept in their bus and knew nothing about his whereabouts during the time their bus was parked at the terminal. The driver of the bus in which the handyman had spent the night stated he witnessed the handyman entering his bus a little after 2 a.m. in his full pants. He asked the handyman why he was spending the night in their bus instead of his own. The handyman had no good explanation to give. The manager of the terminal told the court in evidence that the handyman had no bruises until he reached Guwahati because he too was traveling in the same bus as the handyman that day. He also said the handyman was insistent that their bus be allowed to leave the terminal before its usual time on the fateful morning, but he had denied early departure. The manager also had seen the handyman board and sleep in a bus other than his usual one. To add to this, Jane's mother, in her evidence, stated that she had witnessed the watchman and the handyman talk to each other early that morning when the bus had just arrived. She also told the court how the watchman shouted at her to fall asleep. But was this enough to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt? The defense would say no. Why? The defense argued that anyone else could have accessed the waiting room without the knowledge of the watchman. The mother's statement about she having seen the accused talk to each other after the bus arrived past midnight should not be given any weightage since she had not made such a statement to the police. It is also brought to the court's attention that the vaginal swab of the deceased, that is, the child victim, did not reveal any seminal fluid. Further, the prosecution had not brought this report on record, and therefore adverse inference had to be drawn against the prosecution's case. This was not all. The blood and urine samples of the accused were collected, but it had not been sent for chemical analysis. To add to it, the clothes of the accused were too not sent for chemical analysis. Therefore, there was no forensic evidence tying them to the crime. According to the defense, there was nothing on record to prove that the white stains found on handyman's shorts were semen. But what about the confessional statement of the watchman, one would ask? The defense had an answer for that too. They argued, as far as the confession, the watchman was in the custody of the police for a long time. His confessional statement is a coerced one and had no value. According to the defense, the confession had to be disregarded. The defense also cast doubt on the manner in which the clothes of the accused were seized. The trial court heard the matter at length, but found the case in favor of the prosecution. Both the accused were convicted and sentenced to death. The accused appealed to the High Court. To their dismay, the conviction and sentence was confirmed by the High Court. They then appealed to the Supreme Court, and it is here the watchman's non-retracted confession played a part in the modification of their sentence. The Supreme Court considered that the watchman repented his action and did not retract his confession all through the trial. According to the Supreme Court, the case, though gruesome, did not fall under the rarest of the rare case where death penalty should be awarded, and thus their death sentence was commuted to life sentence. Jane, the 8-year-old little girl, had an untimely and gruesome death. Commutation of death sentence to life may not settle well with many, but life sentence would mean the convict spent at least 14 years of rigorous imprisonment in the jail, if not more. Jane rests in peace. And thus we have reached the end of the episode. This is Indu signing off, and do not forget to leave your feedback because we love to hear from you.